My name is Kelly.
And my name is Will.
We are two Florida attorneys
Who love our 5 dogs.
and 2 cats.
And love listening to true crime.
Mainly me.
So I hope you enjoy our show as we delve into all things spooky.
This is For Crime's Sake.
Good morning and happy Monday.
And welcome to another episode of For Crime's Sake. And to all the mothers out there, I hope you had a great Mother's Day yesterday.
We have Oliver with us in the studio today, being cute and fluffy as he tends to be.
Yes, and I don't know, this is a pretty grisly case. I don't know if Ollie's knows what he's in for.
This one might be a little grisly for a little tiny O man.
Yep.
So, Kelly, what is on the docket this week?
So, I just started actually reading a book this past weekend, and it's called Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. And it is really good, so I'm going to be reading some more of that.
Nice.
And then, I get my hair done, which it really needs it. I'm very excited about that.
You say that, but your hair looks beautiful,
thanks.
So, you know, there's
But
that.
it needs to be done. So I'm looking forward to that. How about you?
So I am going to be working on building our new rowing machine and trying to incorporate it into our little kind of cobbled together home gym of Facebook Marketplace and other things. So
Can I just say that I'm going to add that to my docket because it's going to be a lot of rowing.
yes,
my
yes.
week.
We'll both
Yeah.
be doing that once it's set up and ready to go.
Sounds good. And today we are exploring the unsolved murders of Russell and Shirley Dermond. Sources for this episode include WTSP.com, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, 11alive.com, and an episode of Real Life Nightmare. And we mentioned this a minute ago, but we wanted to warn, the listeners say that the facts of this case are a bit more graphic than some of our past cases have been, specifically involving dismemberment and elderly victims. So if that is not something you want to hear, feel free to sit this one out and join us again next week. And with that said, let's dive in. Russell and Shirley Dermond were husband and wife living in Reynolds Plantation Great Waters, which is a gated community in Eatonton, which is in Putnam County, Georgia, about 80 miles southeast of Atlanta. Reynolds Plantation is in a very wealthy area, and while Russell and Shirley were never ones for flaunting their money, they had worked hard all their lives and built a beautiful $1 million home overlooking Lake Oconee.
And it was a beautiful home.
It really is.
When you look at it, it backs right up to the lake, and it's just big white columns. It's gorgeous.
Russell was a native of New Jersey and had served in the U.S. Navy during World War II.
Which it's worth noting that means Russell was a certifiable hardcore dude.
Oh, yeah.
That was no joke.
No. And Russell had spent most of his career in the fast food industry, which included owning several franchise restaurants over the years before retiring in 1994. And Russell Dermond married Shirley Wilcox on December 15th, 1950, and they were just the cutest couple.
They were.
Adorable. And they went on to have 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter, and 9 grandchildren.
They were doing well. They must have been really proud.
For sure. And Shirley, a dedicated wife and stay-at-home mother, is remembered also as an avid writer, artist, and crossword puzzle enthusiast.
And that's one of the sweetest things is hearing her son describe her and talk about that. We'll get to that later, but yeah, sweet woman by all accounts.
So in other words, Russell and Shirley had lived the classic 1950s American dream and had a very full and fulfilling life. They had worked hard, provided for their children, and they were clearly devoted to each other. I mean, they'd been married like almost 64 years.
It's incredible. It's hard to even fathom being married to someone that long. It's amazing.
Can you imagine? I mean, we're going on our, this will be our second year, and
it's twice my life.
That's wild.
Absolutely incredible.
And they were long retired at this point and enjoyed a well-deserved rest. But then tragedy struck. And right here, we should acknowledge that the most unusual aspect of this case is that, Russell and Shirley were elderly at the time of their deaths.
And that's odd.
And Russell had, at this point, he had been retired for 20 years at this point, and he was 88, and Shirley was 87.
That is very, very, very unusual.
Yes, not your typical victims of violent crimes.
No, not at all.
According to a report from the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics, the rate of violent crime perpetrated against persons under 25 years old is nearly 16 times higher than it is for people 65 and older.
Yeah, it is very, very unusual comparatively to have elderly victims of violent crime, especially homicide.
Yeah. And, elder abuse is a very real and
absolutely.
Unfortunately a prevalent issue. But a very small percentage of homicide victims are older than 65.
Yeah, it's a fraction of the whole and a borderline negligible fraction. This just doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, so we're already, this is already an unusual situation that we're going to delve into. So, as I said, this is an atypical crime, and it should be considered, at least in part, through that lens, right? I mean,
well, because that colors all of the evidence to make us think, okay, in a normal circumstance, this is odd, but considering these are elderly people, really odd.
And unfortunately, and as we'll get to, what we know about these events that lead up to this tragedy is frustratingly little. So, for starters, we don't actually know when the crimes took place. Like, we know that it was sometime between May 1st and May 6th, 2014. So Russell was last seen alive on May 1st, and he was out running errands around town.
Yeah, I think he went to the grocery store, and he had to pick up some medicine for a surgery that Shirley had coming up. And then I think he also went to the bank. So just normal errands, nothing unusual.
And we know that both Russell and Shirley spoke on the phone with their son Brad sometime after that. But that call is the last record we have of the couple alive and safe. There are no other reported sightings or interactions again until after Russell Dermond's body is discovered.
And I mean, that alone is odd. That's so unusual, but because typically people are coming and going a lot, but this is an elderly couple.
Yeah.
It's strange.
So Russell Dermond's body is discovered by one of their, very concerned neighbors on May 6, 2014. And that does, narrow down our time frame a little bit between the known sightings on May 1st and the discovery of Russell's body on May 6th. The couple had been planning to attend a neighborhood party to watch the running of the 2014 Kentucky Derby, and that party and the Kentucky Derby was on May 3rd, 2014.
And who won that race that year?
It was California Chrome.
Well done.
I bet you didn't think I was going to know that, did you?
I really didn't.
I know. I looked it up just because I knew you were going to ask. I was like, nope.
I wanted to feel cool being the only one who knew.
So Russell and Shirley were no-call, no-shows for the Kentucky Derby party. And it seems that people, took note of their absence. I mean, this was pretty unusual. When they said they were going to be somewhere, Russell and Shirley showed up.
Yes.
But it didn't rise to the level of anyone following up on where they were that night. It was just, people were a little bit it was curious.
Yeah, just noted that they weren't there.
Yep. And, that's not overly odd because, these are two people in their late 80s. If, they were tired, decided not to go to the party, that wouldn't be unfathomable.
And that's the thing. We usually have smaller windows of time to work with, but this is an elderly couple, so they're probably not coming and going as much as people who are going to work and coming home every day.
Yeah, exactly. So the Derby party is helpful, though, because it is far more likely that the Dermonds were, either dead or at least incapacitated before the 6:24 p.m. on May 3rd. As opposed to simply just not going to the party, right? Yeah,
well, because like you said, they were people who would stick to their commitments.
Exactly. So we also know that the weekend edition of USA Today had been delivered and brought inside the house, which
presumably that would have been one of them.
Yeah,
yep. Probably Shirley, because we know she loved the crosswords.
Yeah, and that paper was delivered on Friday morning, so that was May 2nd. So the Dermonds are last seen May 1st, and now May 2nd, that weekend edition is brought into the house.
And then the Derby party is 6:24 on May 3rd.
Yep, so the next day.
So we can reasonably conclude that between the morning of May 2nd and 6:24 on May 3rd, somewhere in there is when this crime took place.
So then we fast forward to May 6th and to the discovery of the crime scene at the Dermonds' house. A couple of the Dermonds' neighbors who realized that they hadn't been at the Derby party had grown increasingly concerned about the couple after waiting several days with no sign of either of them. They decided to go over and check up on Shirley and Russell.
And just a note, that's a pretty good thing to do in general, especially with elderly neighbors. All kinds of things can happen. It could even be as simple as a fall, but just go check in. If you haven't seen or heard from them, make sure it's all okay.
Yep, and it was nice that they had neighbors that were looking out for them.
Yeah.
But it was almost immediately apparent that something was wrong. So the neighbors get there and they get no response from knocking knocking on the door, calling for the couple, and there's no word or anything. So they become increasingly worried, and they try the front door, and it was unlocked. And what do you do in this? Yeah. So what do you do? I would go in, I think, at this point.
Yeah, it's tough because on the one hand, you don't want to feel like you're overreacting and just say, oh, I'm going to call the police or something because their front door is unlocked. But on the same token, it's like, the front door is unlocked. That's never a good sign.
Yeah, I would probably just walk in and be like, hello, and just be kind of, just in case they were
give it a shot and see, and then just maybe reevaluate.
Yeah. The neighbors made their way into the house and then, couldn't find Russell or Shirley anywhere. But then one of them, so there's two of them, one of them decided to check the garage, which was attached to the house. And that is where Russell's body was discovered on the floor in a small pool of blood.
Not what you hope to find.
No, that's awful. And this is the most horrifying part. Russell had been decapitated, and Shirley was nowhere to be found.
That's just awful. That's a special kind of heinous crime.
Yeah.
It's
awful.
Scary.
The neighbors made a frantic call to 911, and it was actually the female neighbor that actually made the call. And law enforcement responded immediately, and they did begin searching for Shirley and investigating the scene where Russell's body was discovered. I mean, all of this was done right away. They got on it.
Yeah,
they did not waste any time.
They were quick on this.
I mean, I guess they did have a headless body in a garage. So, I mean, if you're not going to act quickly on that, what are you going to act quickly on?
That's true. That
but still, good for them.
Should warrant a good response.
Initially, though, investigators seemed to believe Shirley had been kidnapped, and they were still very hopeful that she would be found alive.
And I can imagine that hope, of course.
Because they hadn't found Shirley, Russell's funeral was put on hold while, police searched for Shirley. They were hoping they'd find her before the funeral. Yeah.
Yeah.
But his obituary was published at the time, and it listed Russell's wife as one of his survivors.
That kills me.
I know, just to see that, it's so sad.
Survived by his wife, and I think it even said survived by his wife of 68 years. They were including the time that they had known each other before getting married.
So on May 16th, 2014, 10 days after Russell's body was discovered in the garage, Shirley's body was spotted by some fishermen near a dam on Lake Oconee, and it was about 5 miles away from the couple's home.
And that had to just be devastating for everyone looking for her.
Yep, and I mean, the truth is, we don't know for sure who died first. But if Shirley did survive Russell, it wasn't by a very long time. So it was later determined that Shirley had died from either 2 or 3 deep wounds to the head from a blunt object.
And I think strangulation was also suggested, maybe implied too. I saw that in one of the sources, just as an afterthought.
Yeah, most of it mentioned the blunt force trauma to her head. But yeah, it's awful. The exact cause of Russell's death, though, is unknown. But gunshot residue was found on Russell's collar. So, obviously that led investigators to believe that he was likely shot in the head and that the perpetrator, or multiple perpetrators, decapitated him. And one of the theories is to prevent the bullet from being recovered.
And that it's horrific, but it makes a lot of sense. Because,
that does.
How else are you going to, first off, get gunshot residue on the collar of the shirt, but then why bother decapitating? Well, if they were getting rid of evidence.
Which, and this is just an aside for right now, but if they are getting rid of, if they're so worried about that gun, you would think that meant that the bullet, you would think that the gun was purchased legally then in some way, that it could be
lawfully registered.
Yeah,
you're right.
Because then it could be traced back, because there's no reason to be worried if it can't be traced to you.
And that's an interesting thought.
Or at least to a family member or something.
I hadn't even considered that.
Tragically, the perpetrator succeeded, because Russell's head has never been found to this day.
And that's wild to me.
I mean, a lot of the speculation surrounding this case, people believe that it was possibly dumped in the lake, which makes sense of why they haven't found it, but it's just horrifying. And they're poor children, seriously.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a dark crime. Yeah. It really is.
So the Putnam County Sheriff's Office has conducted a thorough investigation of this case, for the last 9 years. And that's almost to the day. But they have yet to make any substantial progress toward identifying the killers.
That's tough. I mean, it's hard because there's so little to work from.
Yeah. No, really, right? And it's wild because there's 2 people that something happened in their home, clearly.
Something.
And just very little evidence was found.
Yeah,
like physical evidence.
And after 9 years, it's not like no more has turned up. It's crazy.
I wanted to mention too, the Putnam County Sheriff. His name is Howard Sill, and he has been committed from the start to solving this case. And this is crazy. You're going to be really impressed. The murder of Russell and Shirley Dermond is Sheriff Sill's only cold case in his 49-year career.
That's nuts. I mean, that's I don't know how that compares to others, but in 49 years, one unsolved.
No, and I watched the Real Life Nightmare episode, and he is just I have so much respect for him. He's not only committed, but he is on this. I mean,
yeah,
you can tell he's
pretty mind blowing.
Yeah. So unfortunately, no matter how badly, we all want to see this case solved, the investigation revealed very little evidence, as we've been saying. And, no DNA was recovered, no weapons, no shell casings, no anything. And further, law enforcement has confirmed that there were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle inside the house, and nothing seemed to be missing or even out of place.
And that's got to be, for me, arguably the wildest part about this whole case, is how could any of this have taken place without any physical evidence being left behind?
Yeah. I mean, their Rolex watches were on the counters. The crossword puzzles, it was being worked on. There was
their medications were all in place. Nobody had come in to steal drugs from them. Yeah. It's really strange.
Part of the reason, could be that the actual murders may not have taken place at the residence, right? And if that's the case, then there would be almost no evidence to recover unless it was on the bodies themselves, like the gunshot residue on Russell's collar.
Right.
In fact, 2 other important pieces of evidence were collected from Russell's body, but they unfortunately don't shed light on who might have been responsible for this. Russell was discovered to have a badly injured finger.
And that's interesting.
It was almost severed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was bad. And several strands of his wife's hair were found matted in his blood.
So that sounds like, and I think it was they said the injury to his finger was before he died.
Yes. So that has led investigators to believe that those things are indicators that a struggle may have taken place in the garage and that Russell may have tried to defend Shirley.
That's just such a sad picture in my mind.
So sad. The other issue is that it appears that the killers attempted to clean Russell's blood to some degree. Even, they surrounded his neck with towels and, to absorb the blood. It seems to be the belief that was an attempt to keep the blood from running under the garage door and thereby alerting neighbors.
That's, again, horrifying, but I guess makes sense.
Yep. And unfortunately, that's it. That's all the evidence we have regarding the murders of Russell and Shirley.
It's nuts. It's wild.
It's crazy.
It's just so little to work from.
I know.
I don't know where, I don't know how anyone's supposed to go anywhere with that. So that brings us to theories, which once again will be somewhat limited because we have such limited evidence to work with.
Yes. So the first theory that we want to address is that this crime was somehow related to the murder of Russell and Shirley's son, Keith, in 2000. And when you first find out that the couple lost Keith to a homicide as part of a drug deal gone wrong in Atlanta, the natural reaction is to think, oh, well, that's a good place to start.
And that's what I think when I hear that. I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But this theory is almost certainly incorrect. For one thing, the person responsible for Keith's death was caught and convicted.
So it's not like an unknown, outstanding
it's not
cold
like that person.
Case.
Exactly. And, that crime took place almost 14 years prior to Russell and Shirley's being murdered, which is a long time. That's super attenuated at that point, for anyone to be working on a revenge scheme.
Yeah, that's that's a new level of grudge holding at that point.
Wow, yeah, that doesn't seem reasonable.
No.
Also, most notably, there was nothing notable about the people involved in that event. Like, Keith was in a tough situation, surrounded by drug dealers, and he was a drug user, unfortunately. And his killer was nobody of great consequence in the drug world either.
And it's not like Keith was involved in dealing himself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
he wasn't part of a scheme to deal drugs, and it's not like he was working with a drug kingpin, and that's who killed him.
It was pretty low level.
It was just like a nobody drug dealer selling drugs to a regular drug user.
Yep. It's absolutely possible that these events could be linked. I mean, it's a big stretch. And the investigators at this point have all but discounted it.
Another possibility is that these murders were carried out by some unknown enemy of Russell and Shirley, and that we just don't have any information about who that person might have been or what their motivations might have been for doing something like this.
I mean, and it seems pretty unlikely as well. This was an elderly couple, and they were known to be kind, private, God-fearing, well-liked people.
Yeah, active in their church, quiet, kept to themselves.
I mean, Shirley had spent her career as a homemaker, and Russell had been retired for 20 years at this point. I mean, if there was something stemming from something in the business world, that was old. Like
some old deal gone wrong, and someone's come to take revenge for that. No,
it seems attenuated also.
Yeah, he'd been retired for 2 decades.
And even if it was some new enemy, it's like, what would the issue have been?
Yeah, these are really wholesome.
Exactly.
88-year-old, 87-year-old couple.
So, that just seems, not like the best theory either. And investigators, give this one minimal credibility as well. So this next theory is, the theory that the Sheriff Sill puts the most stock in. And it's that this was somehow motivated by money. And, automatically it feels wrong because, as we said, there's nothing missing from the house. Valuables were left. And nothing seemed to be missing or damaged.
Yeah, so it's like if this is motivated by money, it's really hard to say, why? They didn't take anything.
Yeah, exactly. And there was no signs of forced entry. And, this has led to some people theorizing that maybe the goal wasn't to take, just petty cash around and valuables that were left, but to force the couple to give up valuable banking information, passwords, or, initiate something that would require Russell and Shirley to take, some affirmative action.
So instead of just like a quick smash and grab, take a Rolex and some cash and run, instead we're going to try and kidnap and or torture to get your banking information, get to the real money.
Exactly. And
I guess that could make sense.
But if that was the plan, it didn't seem to work out the way they'd hoped because none of the couple's money was unaccounted for. This theory would offer some explanation as to why Shirley was taken from the house. If the killer/killers were trying to get information from her, they might have taken her from there to continue, their efforts later on after they had killed Russell, or possibly using Shirley against Russell to try to get that information, whether they were
some kind of leverage.
Her. Yeah, exactly. We're removing her. You get her back. If we find out that information, that could also be.
And that would fit well with the idea that maybe the crimes didn't take place, or the killing didn't take place inside the house.
Yeah.
Because if Russell had been shot in the head inside the house, presumably there would have been some evidence of that.
But even that theory, which is probably the most likely, it requires, big logical jumps and assumptions. And I think that's the reason that this case is so frustrating, is because no matter what the theory is, you have to make so many leaps.
And you and I always talk about how much we hate doing that, because as soon as you make that leap, then you're leaving behind potentially important evidence because your perspective changes.
Yep.
It's all skewed from that point because you've had to assume and leap.
Yeah. And to this day, there are still no suspects in this case, or at least no named suspects. But to quote Sheriff Sill in the days following these horrifying events, he said, "Everyone is a suspect except for me. Because I know where I was. I love that guy. I love Sheriff Sill.
He's great, and I love that perspective.
I do too.
He's like, no, I know where I was. Everyone else is a suspect, because I don't know where you all were.
Exactly.
He's like, I'm taking this every step. I like it.
I know. I don't know Sheriff Sill, but I just like imagine him to be this really honest.
He just seems so genuinely committed to this case, and I have mad respect for that.
The couple's 3 children who were living in 2014 were all investigated, all consented to polygraphs, and were all cleared. Which I did want to make sure that I put out there. The children are not suspects.
No,
they are victims of this as well. And this is horrifying.
And they're out there advocating for answers on this.
Exactly. They are. Yeah. There was a development last year in 2022 when Sheriff Sill told the press that he had just received cell phone data that had been investigated and turned over by the FBI. He indicated that whatever process the data had gone through was not available at the time of the murders in 2014. But that's all we know.
I'm really, really interested in that, because we don't even know whose cell phone this is about.
They are keeping this really close to the vest.
They are.
Which probably, honestly, it's frustrating as people, interested in following the case, but it preserves the integrity of the investigation really well. And
it does.
It seems to me if they're trying to narrow it down on that data, that so here's the 2 things that come to my mind. One, they've narrowed it down to a group, a couple people, 1 or 2 people, and they're following that information. Or I know there's ways that they can just go and check who's in the area total.
Yeah, and
that would be.
It's interesting.
I don't know.
Well, and the idea that whatever it was couldn't have been done in 2014. It's like, what huge leaps in telecommunications forensics have we made in that time? What is this?
I think they're able to track us a lot better. That's what I think. That's what it shows.
That's what I think it probably suggests, and I'm very interested in that.
Which is concerning
it's terrifying.
on one way. But if it solves this murder, then so be it.
Yes,
because this is horrendous, and I'm all for it in this case. Russell and Shirley, their 3 children and 9 grandchildren, they continue to advocate for answers and hope that, one day, someone will be held accountable for this.
Yeah.
Brutal crime.
It's just, it's
awful.
It's horrific. And to go this long and just not know.
Not have any answers. That's awful. To echo the sentiments of the family and investigators, somebody out there knows what happened to the Dermonds. Whether this person was acting alone or in concert with somebody else. Maybe they even just heard something or saw something or know something, or possibly just can fill in gaps that will help solve this case.
Somebody knows something.
Somebody does.
It's not like one of our mysterious cases where we don't know what happened to the person. And then if someone goes and kills themselves and we don't know what happened to them, maybe no one knows what happened. But here, someone is responsible for this, which means somebody out there knows exactly what happened. And
it seems most likely that there was more than one person involved in this.
Yeah.
I think to handle two people, albeit I know they're old, but still.
And I think Sheriff Sill has said the same thing on a couple of occasions. Yeah. He's pretty much convinced that this had to be more than one person. Yeah. And if that's the case, then for sure
other people know.
Mm-hmm. Someone has answers out there.
And a lot of times with cases like this, that's how they get solved. Is somebody comes forward. Even just rumors sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes that's all it takes.
And more than that, Sheriff Sill, he's not giving up. And I believe him.
I do too.
And as Brad Dermond said when asked about the sheriff, he said, if there's somebody who's going to get this thing solved, it's going to be him. And that says a lot.
Yes, it does. That's a lot of belief.
That man seems like a man of his word.
He seems committed.
Yep, he does. So anyone with information is asked to please call the Putnam County Sheriff's Office at 706-485-8557.
So Oliver has been excellent today. Very well behaved.
He really has been.
Yeah, he's been a little cutie. Handled the tough episode better than I thought he would.
He was sleeping most of the time.
Yeah,
and licking my arm.
And he doesn't speak English.
He does not. Not that we know of.
Yeah.
But thanks for listening, and make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show.
And if you have thoughts on anything that we have discussed in any of our episodes, or if you have any cases you want to request, let us know. Let us know on social media at For Crime's Sake. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or send us an email anytime at info@forcrimesake.com.
And thanks, and have a great week, everyone.